Welcome to the Intentional Guy Podcast, where we are driven to help men become more intentional and purposeful in their daily lives. Your host, Michael Chestnut, will interview amazing guests to get insight and glean wisdom from, so we can integrate intentional living and lead happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. All right, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to Intentional Guy. I'm Michael Chestnut, your host. I'm here with our guest today, Kyle. Is it Duford?
It's Duford, actually. Usually we talk about that before the intro. We forgot.
I know. I thought about that. I missed that opportunity.
Duford.
Anyway, it's all good. Duford. So, Kyle, I was telling you, I've taken a 90-day sabbatical. We're coming back. You're my first guest coming back into the new year with everything. And thank you so much for being a part of this. We talk about growing intentionally as in our life as men, especially as Christian men going forward, because we, have a lot of attacks sometimes, but we also, if we're not intentional in our life, either we'll lead life or life will lead us, and we have to have that purpose and that drive in ours. I really like your story, what I saw of it and everything. And I would love for you, you have a book out called Twice Found, and I would love for you to share a little bit of us about your story and about your book, if you would, please. Yeah,
well, I appreciate that, and thanks for having me as your first guest after the little hiatus there. Your intro says, hopefully, your intro says emphatically to glean insight and wisdom, and I don't know if I have a lot of wisdom to share, but maybe a cautionary tale, if anything else, that's just as good. So anyway, thanks for having me.
Man, we all have stories, right? And God uses our stories to glean insight into and to find wisdom. So
well, and that's kind of a great segue into my story and my book. They're kind of one and the same thing. The book obviously stopped at a certain point because I released a few years ago, but the idea was I felt really called to write down the transformative nature of my spiritual walk and kind of what happened in my life from the beginning till very recently. I was not raised a Christian. I was raised in a mostly agnostic home, I would say. My grandparents were very staunch Catholics. I should say my grandmother claimed to be. I never saw her go to mass. I never saw her read a Bible. I never saw her read anything. Never saw a pair of rosary beads anywhere. But that being said, my mother went to Catholic college, and this is 1958 through 61, 62. So she thought that she could sit in a toilet after a man did and she'd get pregnant. And we're talking that kind of age of really, really clamped down. Not a lot of truth, not a lot of wisdom, not a lot of, it was a lot of fear-based kind of Catholicism. And yes, not to say all Catholicism is like that, but for her, that's what it was like. And we know kind of stories in the Northeast that kind of like, it happened to me, so it's going to happen to you kind of thing. So she vowed that she would never raise her children, there's three of us, as believing in anything. So my brother became an atheist, my sister's an agnostic, and I kind of was the black sheep of the family as the youngest one. I was never really a bad kid, but I didn't quite understand anything. I was kind of living on my own a lot. My father had left when I was younger. There was my mom working a lot of jobs trying to put us through school. My brother and sister are significantly older than I am, and so they were kind of off to college, and I was young. And in the middle of the 80s, I was the poster child for a latchkey kid. It was just very, that's just my life. And along that path, I never knew that Jesus was a person, or let alone a man, let alone the Son of God. I had no idea. I remember standing on, I talk about this in my book, I remember standing on my grandparents' back porch, and I said, Jesus Christ, Mom, why? I was probably 9, and she smacked me. And I said, what the hell? She smacked me again. I said, oh, she smacked me again. And I was like, I had no idea what was going on. It was basically likening Jesus to a curse word. And that's how we were raised. That's what Jesus Christ meant. And so through, long story short, through really the amazing high school ministry of Young Life, and a very particular person who sought me out, was very intentional with me, saw something in me where other people didn't, and invested in me. And I met the Lord through Young Life at one of their camps in South Florida in 1990, I think, 1990. So I was like 16 years old, didn't quite know what to do with it, and just kind of felt like, okay, I guess I'm a Christian now, right? But I had nobody in my life to follow. I didn't, I was told, okay, now you have to go to church and read the Bible and pray. And if we know anything about Christ, he's anything but those things. He's not, prayer is probably the biggest one. It's not like, go do this, go do that, go do this. He's just like, love people, love me. And I missed that message. So I went off to college and tried, and I say tried because I literally tried to fall into what I thought a Christian should be. And the book picks up from there in the sense that I was trying to figure out life as this kind of like man-child, if you will, not really mature enough to understand my place in the world. Because I became a Christian at 16, didn't experience the life of the rebelliousness that my friends had, and kind of whether it was, sexually or whatever. I was never a bad kid. And so I kind of came into a really weird spot in my life where I was very immature in college and didn't quite understand things that were around me, and had no place to go, because now I felt like I had literally no place to go because I thought I had to be a certain way. So that's kind of kind of my upbringing. I walked away from the Lord shortly after that because of a series of events that happened in my life that I just didn't know, like, okay, I don't get it. Like, I thought you were going to do this for me and you didn't. And so like, I didn't walk away from him in the sense that I didn't believe it anymore. I just walked away from my faith because I was just like, I'm not doing it right. Now I can look back and realize that that's right. Again, antithetical to who Jesus is, that he's not that way at all. He wasn't, grace isn't rule following. Grace is undeserved favor. And I didn't deserve it, but he still offered it to me. I didn't get that message. So that's kind of the beginning phase of my life. It was kind of a really weird, 22 years, just trying to figure out who I wanted to be without really a lot of good influence in my life.
And that's probably the hardest part of our journey, is finding our own way. Mm-hmm. We only know what we know, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I like our show. We have to be intentional to grow, to become a better person. So as you grew, and I like that you're a Christian businessman. I like the fact that you can bring that into this, because there's a lot of people who have this, I have to separate my faith and my work from one another, when actually, no, they can combine quite well, right, together, but a lot of men, they struggle with that. How would you define how you've been able to do that?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, with a lot of reticence at first, for exactly the reasons you outlined. If you can't figure out, very similarly, if you can't figure out who you are and embrace who you are and know that the Lord put you here for a reason, then you almost have no right speaking to people in any business or any regard, and whether it's school or sports or business or whatever. Like, he has a plan for us, and not acknowledging that is the biggest problem. So for me, I see no separation between who I am out of work and who I am in work. I am one person. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to kind of contain my thoughts, and my head's going all over the place right now because there's so much to say on this topic. Our plaques, those of us who have offices here, our plaques on our door say, husband, father, and then I think mine says runner, cyclist, and then my title. And people say, "Why?" And we tour them around the building and say, "Why is that?" And I go, "Well, because this is who I am. My title is just what I do." So we try to instill that belief here. Is like this: you being here, or you working here, or you working with us, or alongside of us, or adjacent, whatever. That's not who you are. Who you are is so much deeper, so much more colorful, so much more layered, so much more delicate, so much more, and it goes on and on and on. This is just what you do from 9 to 5 or whatever. So in my mind, you can't make a claim like that and not bring Jesus along for the ride, So for me, it's very simple. Now, I will go back to my story, and I don't want to, if you do read it, or if anyone else reads it who's listening to this, I made a lot of mistakes in intervening 21 years from walking away from my faith to walking back. But when I came back, and I won't spoil the arc of how amazing it was and how he brought some people back into my life and how he really showed, again, that undeserved favor, that grace towards me. But it was right around then when I heard him say, and I've never heard God talk to me, and I don't dispute people who say they hear him talk a lot. For me, that's just not how he's spoken to me. But there's one instance in my life I could literally say I heard, even though it wasn't through my ears. It was just this feeling of a sentence. He said, "Stop denying me, and I got you." And I thought it was funny because he used that vernacular, like, "I got you." And I was like, that very specific. Like, he was speaking directly to me. And I made a decision right then and there. I was on I-5 heading north in Oregon. And I made a decision right there, bawling my eyes out, that no matter what, I will be bold for you. It's it. And whether you don't like me for that, whether friends don't like me for that, whether business people don't want to work with us for that, that's on them. That has nothing to do with me. I know who I am. I know that I wouldn't be here without Jesus. And then he's the most important thing, person, entity, anything in my life. That I am nothing without him. So being bold for him has allowed me to do business in a really fearless way, knowing that if I'm prayerful about it, if I involve good godly counsel, if I, entrust in my wife and the gentleman who runs the business, who also is a believer, there's so many different people. If I know that I'm doing this thing right in accordance with the gifts he's given me, it's going to work. So why do I give a rip if people don't like the fact that I say I love the Lord? Okay, that's fine. It has nothing to do with our work. So that's kind of how I've reconciled it. And I don't know if that works for everyone, but for me, because I know a lot of people, you say that you're a Christian and you might lose your job, which is unfortunate, or you might be told that you're violating some HR policy. And I'm not naive enough to think that my title here doesn't allow me certain comforts that other people might not have.
Right.
But that's for me, like, okay, what, like Peter was like, okay, what are you going to do to me? Hang me upside down on a cross? Like, okay, I've seen something so much bigger than you. Do whatever you want to me. I know what's the truth. Now, when the rubber hits the road and you might lose your job over it, that's a different story. But so I caution people not to be that bold if you're in a position where you can't talk about your faith. But for me, that's how I do it.
Well, I like what you brought up, because one of the biggest things is identity, right? I think men, and people in general, we struggle with identity issues, And so when I'm talking to guys and men, and I'll say, "Hey, so tell me about yourself. Who are you?" And I'll ask that question. It's purposeful. And 9 out of 10 times what I get from them is what they do for a living. I'm an engineer. I'm, I sell, I'm a car salesman. I'm a construction worker, whatever, it relates us as men. A lot of times our identity is wrapped up in our work and what we do for a living. Right. And so that's where we see ourselves, but our identity is way more than the job that we're doing. Yeah. It's way deeper than that. And so trying to get men to understand that our identity lies within our everyday work. I would rather, instead of being, known as someone who works in juvenile justice, I'm someone who I'm a good husband. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I love my family. I love my God. I love church. I love what God's doing in my life, because it's been radically changed. Because a lot of times our jobs will fail us. What do we do when our identity is wrapped around us and then we get fired and we're gone from there?
Right.
And I know in your book you mentioned a little bit about that. That was one of those pivotal moments in our life. Right?
Yeah. I always tell my kids, I've been fired more times than I've been hired. And they scratch their heads like, is that possible? I'm like, well, if anyone could figure out, it was me. Because I was so wrapped up in myself and like, and there's so much to unpack here. And I know a lot of men deal with this. Because my dad left when I was young, because I didn't really have a male role model, because the world said X, Y, and Z. I grew up in a very dysfunctional way, but not unlike many people in the 80s where, divorce became rampant and, moms and dads were trying to figure out their things and like lived in different states. And most of my friends were growing up as kids, their parents were divorced. And so it's not unusual for someone to be here today, looking back at their life. I'm almost 50. So looking back at their life and going, gosh, what could have been different? But I actually felt like I had to figure it out. And so in the process of figuring out, I didn't want to get hurt anymore. I had this 6-year-old mentality in my head where my dad left. You can't hurt me if I don't give a rip about my dad. I'm scared. Well, if I pretend it's not there, I can't be scared. All these different things that a therapist would say. My wife's a therapist, by the way, would say that you're just adding layers of masks. And so I became so impervious to critique, to rules, to anything, because I had built up this persona, which was so bomb-proof to protect what was inside. But it was kind of like I built up so much armor that I was almost unstoppable. Like I'd walk into a room and just plow everyone over, like without concern for who it was I was hurting. And it manifested in lots of different really bad, negative ways, ruined relationships, relationships with my family members, with one of my kids, like just so many things just went sideways. The biggest one for me from a very outward perspective is I couldn't get the job thing right. I couldn't figure it out. Like, okay, I'm doing really good work, but I would do good work. My ego would inflate because I knew that I was indispensable. And then I would start making decisions based on this false sense of self. And it was just this snowball, which was inevitable that almost every job I had, almost everyone, would end in a termination because I just became unbearable as a human, let alone as a worker. And it was all based on this massive sense of insecurity, this massive sense of unsure of self, a lot of shame. And so that was really tough. So I got fired kind of in a massive crash and burn when I was at Dr. Martens, and I had a really amazing job. I was the global senior vice president of e-commerce and digital for the globe of this massive footwear brand, which is the storied 60-year-old heritage boot brand. And I got to travel first class to an office in London. I had an apartment in London. I flew back and forth from Portland, Oregon over there. And I had an office in Tokyo and it was an amazing life, but it became like, hey, this is me. Like I finally made it. And that, of course, superseded all those things that I felt like that would kind of placate my shame. And it just made it worse. And so at the end of the day, all of it happened at one time. Divorced, suicide attempt, fired from my job. Like it was just this boom, 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 boom. And I couldn't handle it. But that's really where God found me, or rather where I allowed him to see me and just said, all right, I can't do this on my own. And it's not fun either. Like it wasn't fun. Like a first class ticket is amazing. A first class ticket to escape your life or to think that that's all you're about is just empty. And so that was really my issue. And there's so many more. So yeah, that was a big deal. So now I'm confident. I mean, I stutter. You can hear that in my voice. I make mistakes a lot. I transpose words. I might say the wrong thing thinking it's funny. I make a lot of stupid errors, but I try to embrace it now. Kids make fun of me because I'm old. They're like, what did you like have an outhouse and no telephone? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I embrace those little idiosyncratic behaviors of mine now because that's how God made me. That's who I am. Instead of thinking that they're all like pieces of my shame. Like, no, forget it. Shame isn't from God. Guilt can be, but not shame. And I really believe that if you really work through those things, and I'm not even close to finishing what I started and kind of uncovering who I am and who I want to be, I think you have a fighting chance. So for men in particular, it's how we started this. For men in particular, there's so many things in my life that I felt like I couldn't say or do or be because, well, I'm the guy. I'm a man. I grew up without a dad, so I have to be the dad. I have to be, this super dad, or I have to earn the biggest wage, or I have to have the biggest house, or whatever that the world tells you a man has to. But that's all, part of my language. It's all bullshit. Because if you can't come to terms with the beautiful dignity that was Jesus as a man and what he went through, which he felt all those things. He felt, loss. He felt hopelessness. He felt all that. He cried. Like there was so many things about him, arguably the strongest man on the planet ever, felt those things, which a lot of the world says are very feminine or emasculating, are anything but. And so embracing that side of me and realizing, hey, I can fail and ask a brother for help versus try to make it on your own. That's the biggest thing. So I know I'm kind of slapshot all over the place, but there's so much here that's just been exciting and terrifying to go through all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, everybody wants us to be cookie cutter, especially in our faith. They want us to be cookie cutter, and we're not. And embracing who we are and how God made us is incredible once you can do that. Because I found out that most of my flaws were coming because I was trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be, and instead of being who God created me to be. Right. Because I felt like all my flaws, like what you spoke about, were horrible, and therefore I had to fix these terrible flaws that God created in me, instead of embracing that, hey, this is who I am. And once I've done that, I've been able to shine a lot better because, I'm not trying to be somebody else now. I'm just being who God's made me to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably that's where integrity comes from too. Yes, we strive to be, I want to be a better man than who I am, but there's not two of us, and what works for you is not going to work for me. And what I see is a lot of men, they quit their walk with Christ because they're trying to match it to somebody else's walk, and they can't do it.
Yeah, and let me interject there real quick. Sorry, Michael, but like looking at somebody else's walk, which is equally rivaled with the same things you're dealing with. I think that's the biggest thing, that men look at other men and think, if I could only just, especially when it comes to Christian circles, if I could only just be like you. And yet that person is looking at other people saying the same thing. And that when we get even pastors, like there's so many people and we think we figured it out, but we haven't. It's this collective, veil that we wear. Just go like, if you don't really see the stuff, it's why it's so important to have really, really, you used the word earlier, integral men around you who can speak into your life, who you're not afraid to share everything with, because we're all going through something like this. We all have shame. We all have pride issues. We all have X, Y, and Z. And they might not be the same thing, but they're on the same level. And, your alcoholism might be open because it's visible, but my insecurity and my shame and my, X, Y, and Z, like it's in God's eyes, we're both failed. We're both flawed. And there's beauty in accepting it, and beauty in saying, it doesn't feel that way right away, by the way. You can't just go, yeah, I'm screwed up, like Jesus take me, and go, oh, that felt great. No, it's going to be awful. It's going to feel like crud going through it, but knowing that on the other end is your Lord, who is looking at you going, well done, good and faithful servant. Like, that's what I want to get to. And it's going to be a long journey. And the fact is, I'll never get there. The fact is, on my own, I don't deserve to be in heaven. I never will. No matter what I do, I'll never be able to get in. It's only through what he did for me on the cross, which lets me get there. So listen, I'm flawed 6 times come Sunday, but I'll be damned if I look at somebody else, let alone in the church these days, and say, I want to be like him. No. Hey, let's do this thing together. That's what I want to do. That's more exciting.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's a question that goes along with you as a brand leader.
Sure.
Okay. I look at kind of towards that, branding myself, but not to the fact that I'm fake or have a mask on, but like for my kids, it's so important that I illustrate to them the importance of who I am, mm-hmm. right? I want to walk an authentic walk. And so in a lot of ways, I'm branding Mike, and I have to figure out what that is before I can put it out there, right? Going towards, figuring out with this intentional guide, everything that I've been doing, I've been having to learn about branding and all that stuff, but I've compared it to this because I want to be authentic. I want when people to see something in me that they like it, and they want to know a little bit more about that, because then that's where I can share my faith and the things that are important to me with them. And I want them to see my happiness I don't know if I'm comparing this great or not. I'm not a brand leader in any way, shape, or form, but I know that in the business, sometimes we don't, our business world, our work life and our home life and our church life, they seem to be three separate things. And I kind of want them all to mesh together, because I want to be 100% of who I am 100% of the time.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, and you hit a lot of really amazing points there, which we could take any one of them. But what you just said at the end there is really interesting, because if you look at, let's look at brands, right? And this is, if you think I can talk, wait until I talk about brands. We could talk about this for hours. Look at Starbucks.
Let's talk.
I don't even know, where are you located, Michael?
Pensacola, Florida.
Okay, so you have Starbucks down there, obviously, right? You have Starbucks everywhere. So I don't know if it's the coffee of choice down there, but you know Starbucks. You've got many different ways you can interact with Starbucks. You know exactly what they look like. It's green. You're going to see green something. You're going to see some sort of siren logo, maybe an older version or a newer version, whatever. You're going to see their block lettering, something on an arch, maybe. You know something about pumpkin spice lattes, right? You know all those things about Starbucks. You know the color apron. You know the type of food they serve. You know all these type of places they're located in, right? So you have a picture of what Starbucks is. You might not understand. I think their mission is to like create these sense of third places, home, work, and then the coffee shop. If I'm not mistaken, that might be an old, but it doesn't matter what that is. You know what they stand for in the sense of like good coffee, that's, somewhat relatively affordable, all these different things that make up the brand. And I say make up the brand because a logo is not a brand. A name isn't a brand. It's a visual expression, or it's a written out expression of the brand itself. So the brand is a promise of what you think about when you think about something. So that's Starbucks. When you go to the grocery store and you see a Starbucks Frappuccino in a ready-made canister, it's still Starbucks, but you're not in a Starbucks, right? You don't have to have the entire experience of being in a coffee shop, a standalone coffee shop, to know that when you hold that in your hand. Well, why? Because Frappuccino is one of their branded words. You see the logo, you see the colors, you see the script, all those things about it. I say that to say, just because you are you, it doesn't mean you can still be 100% authentic, but just appear differently in different places. So you can be the Michael at church, and as long as the core values of who you are remain the same at home, at work, at church, in your friend circles, socially, whatever, then they don't need to see everything. They don't need to see like, this is what, the conversation my wife and I just had. This is what I have in the bank. This is what, reserve those for your mastermind groups or your small groups or whatever. That's, you don't need to show everything to everyone. And that's a lesson that I had to learn as well. This kind of new vulnerability I found was, it's okay. And we learned this at work too. I'm very big on transparency and vulnerability, and I think it comes from the top. So we have almost 40 people here and leading a group of amazing men and women and doing some amazing work. It's really stressful, and I figured, well, I'll just be super open and transparent. But guess what? Even if I don't know how to answer something, I shouldn't tell the whole group, hey, guys, I don't know what to do. Now, I made that mistake once, and then they lose confidence in you. Now, it might be true, it might be authentic, but it's not the right place to say that. So just to encourage people to think that just being open and vulnerable and transparent and authentic and all those things that we just talk about, being intentional, doesn't mean you have to be all things to all people at all times. You will literally exhaust yourself. And what you rob is the integrity of your own soul by trying to do that. You can still uphold your values as long as, I always say, I kind of joke, I said the only two things I care about is don't steal from my company and don't hit on my wife. That's it. But there's so much more to me than that. But you take that as a joke, you're like, okay, well, as long as those two things don't happen in life, I can still be me. Obviously, I'm taking that to an extreme joke, but the idea of just don't change who you are on the inside, and it's okay. So, yeah, I encourage you to be real, to be Michael, to be the great dad, to be the great husband, to be the worker and the stuff you're doing with kids and like awesome, and be at church. You're not going to be the same person in all things. And look at Jesus again for that model. He was different with the disciples as he was with the Pharisees. Same guy, same message, same truth, different presentation. And so as long as the presentation remains who you are, then you're okay. That's branding, Jesus, and life all mixed up in one. And that's really where the action is.
Let me ask you this, Kyle. because one of the things is talking about being intentional. You're a leader, you're a business owner.
I'm sorry, not a business owner. Just want to clarify. Just a president. Yeah. But I definitely want to give credit where it's due. And yeah, that's all.
I got you. So, but you lead this business, and there's a lot of guys, and you've probably been in those jobs that you hated. And there's guys I run into, and I was one of them too. I worked a dead end job, and you can feel so defeated in that because, when you hate what you do because you're just bringing home the paycheck, right? But you have to have this job because you got to bring your family depends. You're being a good provider. Mm-hmm. How do you encourage that guy listening to be better, to motivate, to find better, and know that you don't have to settle just for that dead end job? I mean, it may take time to get out of there.
Well, I mean, what an amazing question. I'm not completely convinced I'm equipped to answer that fully, but I've been blessed, knock wood, that I've been able to have really amazing jobs, whether I was able to keep them or not, throughout my life. They're all very creative in some fashion, very open to ideas, very fun, very either great brands or great ideas or great products or whatever. Very fortunate in that way. However, that being said, there have been times in my life where I had to sling coffee to make ends meet. And I had to do some things that weren't really prestigious or fun or glamorous or whatever, that you'd rather maybe not somebody know that that's what you did because it was embarrassing or it was low pay or whatever. There's honor in working hard so you can provide. I fully believe that. And the problem, and this goes back to the case of identity, the problem is when people start believing that that's who they are, because the reverse can happen. You start believing that's who I am, is a low end, menial, hourly job. No matter what service you're providing, no matter how great that might be, whatever. But if you start believing that that's who you are, then you're never going to get yourself out of it. And I don't want to conflate this with people who purposely take jobs which they know don't pay well because they're convicted to go do it or they're called to do it. I mean, high school teachers today still don't make a lot of money. I'm not going to look down on that, nor am I going to say that they should for something else because it's low paying. I don't want to get down that because I don't believe that. But if you feel like you're trapped, if you feel like you have an opportunity for something greater, I mean, I just believe it all takes time and energy and belief and prayer and putting yourself in the right situations. It's that old story of the floods come and the guy says the Lord's coming, don't worry about it, and the boat comes by and then the helicopter comes by and he dies eventually, and he says to the Lord, like, what the heck? I mean, I thought you were going to save me. He goes, yeah, I sent 3 opportunities. You said no to each one of them. I think sometimes we just have to be open and see what happens. And I think there's privilege in that. There's fun in that. It doesn't feel that way at the time. There's been times where after that Dr. Martin's exit, I was after my severance ran out, I was looking for work and I had nothing, and I would take anything that I had. And of course, it affected my value and my contribution and my manhood and all these things. And again, this is where great partner comes into play. But I was like, wait, I have an opportunity here. I have an opportunity to reach higher, to strive further, to reinvent myself, to do something different. And a lot of people in that space crumble because they don't have a good support system. They don't have a great partner. They don't have a relationship with the Lord. So I don't know if I have anything to say to people who are in those jobs right now who are listening, but if you want to go do something, God's put that desire in your heart. He gives you the desires of your heart. You have to go help make the path to get there, but he will honor that. I believe that for sure. I should have led with that.
And I think sometimes we have to create opportunity where there's no opportunity. For me, it was hanging around the right men. I strongly believe we're the sum of the 5 people we hang out with. And so, I started realizing how important that was. And so I was one of those guys in this deadbeat job that wasn't going nowhere. I had gone as high as I could. I was miserable. But in the meantime, I knew that God had me, but what can I do? And part of mine was surrounding myself with successful men. I was surrounding myself with them. What can I learn from them? What can I learn from a friendship with them? And I didn't even think these guys would want to be my friend, but man, they took me in. They were my friend. Next thing I know, I'm leaving this job for a better job. Now I was scared because I was going from, I worked at the prison. You want to talk about a depressing place. I worked at the prison and I went into sales and I was like, I know nothing about sales. And this was 100% commission.
Ooh,
I'm like,
that's a scary place.
I don't have a safety net.
Yeah.
You know, it was a lot of fear, but then I went out and I made more money than I ever made before. And getting out of that environment and not feeling so defeated every day going to work changed everything in me. But it started with me, doing what I could do, such as, let's surround myself with healthy people.
Yeah.
Because working at the prison, not a lot of healthy people live there or work there,
Right.
and I needed to change that for me to get there.
I've heard you say that on other shows. You're the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most, 5 men you hang out with the most. And I'm as gregarious as I sound. I'm very introverted. I actually don't have a lot of really close friends. It's tough to always be be the leader. It's harder to get closer to people that work for you and things like that. But I've got 4 men in my life, and they're all the husbands of my wife's best friends. And it just happened that way. And Jonathan, Jordan, Tim, and Jeff. And these guys could not be more different from one another. And Tim and I are a little bit similar, but everyone else, they're just all raised down here in the South. We're in Greenville, South Carolina. Good old boys, homeboys. If you would have told me years ago, some of your best friends are going to be like rednecks from South Carolina, I'm like, first of all, I'm never living in South Carolina. Secondly, you're crazy. A lot of that was my own pride and like going like, well, what can people like that, quote unquote, teach somebody like me? Look, how silly and ridiculous is that comment, right? I have learned so much about how to love my wife from Jordan, how to be great with my hands and build things from Tim, how to care for my children from Jeff, how to build a business from Jonathan. Like, because you just spend time with these people and you realize, we just shared Thanksgiving with 2 other families and two of those guys, because we share life together. Like, it's so much more enjoyable to be able to say to a guy, hey man, I don't know the answer. I screwed this up. I don't know how to fix this. Or because they might not know the answer, but they're there for you. Good friends will do that. It's been such a privilege for me to get to know some of these guys. Let me tell you a quick story on that, because I just think it's really poignant. He'd kill me if he heard this. But so these 2 guys, Jonathan and Jordan, their 2 wives work with my wife. They're all therapists. And so I'm leaving Jordan's house one day, and he's a real gregarious, kind of real good guy, great Southern accent, just really hospitable and genuinely so, right? And he's standing next to Jonathan, and he says, and Jordan says to me, man, so good to see you. We're leaving the house. He goes, so good to see you. Gives me a big hug, tells me he loves me. And I love you too, man. And I just met Jonathan recently. I look over at him, he folds his arms and he goes, I ain't never giving you a hug. And I'm like, fair enough. Like, this guy is a war vet, he's burly guy, like kicked my ass by looking at me. And since then we've told each other we loved each other. He's given me hugs. We both cried together because he had the same stuff he has and had the same stuff that I have and had, which is pride and shame and all these things that you think you have to do. So we have this unbelievable connection now because we've both been willing to shed that false facade and be real. So the 3 of us get together. We're able to have these amazing conversations about how to build wealth or equity or buy property or love on our families or throw a wedding for somebody, or like such great conversations because we all know each other's weaknesses, and that is where life is fun, So for me, I never in my life up until recently would have even given these guys a second thought, because I was so prideful and so hurt myself that I felt like I would have been better than them. And I am privileged to be in their company because they're so much better men than I am. So it's just really interesting who the Lord puts in your life. And I'm blessed by it. So don't be closed off because they look different or they sound different or they act different, because men of God come at you from all different directions. It's just for your privilege to know them. Yeah.
We have our small group tonight, and the the four of us men in this group cannot be any different than the four men that are in this group, right? But it's amazing what we've learned from one another in this time, that it's just been, I don't know, it's changed me, and that's how important relationships are. And that's why they're so important, as men. I mean, a lot of people, when I talk to them about their friends of five, especially if they're married, they're like, I haven't had a best friend since high school. Well, I'm always encouraging, well, you need to change that, because a good, healthy friend, can make the big difference.
Absolutely.
In your life.
I love that. I've probably, like, my lifelong best friend is still my best friend. And I just even texted him the other day, and I just texted him out of the blue, and I just said, hey, I love you, man. That's it. I have a rule now of my life that I don't know where it came from, but if I think of you, I'll write you. That's just, I want you to know you're being thought of. And so it could be some random I haven't talked to in ages, and if I don't have their phone number to text them, I'll send them an email. And he wrote back and he just said, I love you too so much. And I'm like, that's special. That's so important. But similarly, you get to have a quote unquote best friend in your, like I said, I'm almost 50. I never thought like 50-year-olds run around saying you have best friends, but it's like, it's such a fun thing to run around life together. Now I'd still rather be with my wife at home. So sometimes if we can hang out as couples, it's better.
Right.
Because given the choice, I would rather be home with her or with her. But the opportunity to share is so fun. It makes me feel young. It makes me feel alive, like to joke around. There's some guys in the office that are close to my age. We talk about jokes from movies from the 80s that no one else gets. And I love that because it gives us a smile and gives us, that's the banter. Sometimes it doesn't have to be serious. Sometimes it can just be fun and, and speak like Schwarzenegger for an afternoon. And that's where, you get your jollies for a bit and move on to the next thing.
Well, that's what I like too. I mean, I grew up with everyone thinking that you have to have that facade of a Christian man all the time and can't let your hair down. Man, I love letting my hair down with my friends and having just a great time, I just think the authentic walk is your everyday walk, just being real and striving to find your identity in the right things versus the wrong things. And then by doing that, you're just going to be a better man. You're going to be a better leader at work. Yeah. You're going to be a better father at home. You're going to be a better husband. If you can confidently find out who that is. And it starts with knowing your values, your character. My problem was I woke up one day and I realized I didn't possess the character I thought I did. And I had to intentionally work at that.
There's a great brander out there that I follow a lot of his teachings. His name is Chris Do, D-O. He might not be relevant for most people, but he has a course that he teaches, and he just spoke at the Adobe Max Summit here recently on personal branding. And some of that might be just completely irrelevant to most of your listeners. But the takeaway for me was one of the things he says is write down a list of characteristics of yours. And I might be screwing this up, but at some point write down the things that people think are negative traits about you. And take one of those words and then add an adjective or something, whatever the grammar next word is, whether it's a noun or something that changes the meaning of the first word. I love it. And so for him, he calls himself the loud introvert because people said he was loud, but he's also introverted. Now, there's a cool dichotomy of word choice, but I love that. And I've been kind of going through this exercise, like, okay, who am I? I can talk a lot. I'm loud. I can whatever. And what is that thing for me? And so because there's the way that other people see you, and there's the way that you have an opportunity to see yourself and flip the script and learn from it, but make it better. And that's where I think it could be really fun. So when we talk about merging branding and life and our faith and all these sorts of things, they're really all one and the same. That's why I have the best job in the world, right? Because I get to love the Lord, love on my staff, and do some really cool work for people, and which helps give meaning to other businesses. So for me, I just think it's the perfect blend. I think Jesus was the ultimate brander, if you will, and there's something there to unpack.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Intentional Guy Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and got some real value out of it. Tell others what you learned and share the podcast if you think they would benefit from it too. Please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review, and consider checking out our website, intentionalguy.org, to learn more about us and get in touch. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.